June 8, 1944. Abbaye d'Ardennes, Normandy, France. SS Standartenführer Kurt Meyer stood in the stone courtyard of the medieval monastery, watching as 7 Canadian prisoners were led toward the garden. The 27-year-old commander of the 25th SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment couldn't suppress a cold smile. These Allied invaders would learn what happened to those who dared challenge the Reich. What Meyer didn't know, what none of the fanatical Hitler Youth soldiers celebrating their first combat victories could have imagined, was that they were writing their own death warrants. Within days, the murders they committed would transform the Normandy campaign into something far darker. The Canadians were about to stop taking prisoners. The transformation began with whispers, then with bodies, then with blood. This is the story of how war crimes beget war crimes, how young fanatics learned that cruelty has consequences, and how SS officers, who laughed while murdering prisoners, died begging for mercy they never showed. June 6, 1944, had been chaos incarnate. The 3rd Canadian Infantry Division stormed Juno Beach at 07:45 hours, facing withering fire from German bunkers and beach obstacles. By 1,000 hours, Juno was secured, but at a terrible cost. Over 300 Canadians lay dead or wounded on the sand. Those who survived pushed inland with grim determination, advancing 7 miles by nightfall. Among the Canadian units were the North Nova Scotia Highlanders, farm boys, and miners from Canada's maritime provinces, men like Private Thomas Windsor from New Glasgow, whose last letter home spoke of seeing France for the first time. Like Lance Corporal James Moss from Halifax, who carried a photograph of his young wife. Like Sergeant William Nichols, a veteran of the Dieppe raid who had sworn to avenge his fallen comrades. None of them would survive the week. Facing them was the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, one of the most fanatical units in the German military. The division's 17 to 19-year-old soldiers were true believers, raised from childhood in Hitler Youth indoctrination camps. They had been taught that Slavs, Jews, and now the Western Allies were Untermenschen, subhuman creatures unworthy of mercy. Their officers were worse. Veterans of the Eastern Front, men like Meyer, Wilhelm Mohnke, and Gerhard Bremer had learned warfare in the hell of Russia, where the rules of civilized combat had long been abandoned. They brought those lessons to Normandy. In early April 1944, during final preparations before deploying to France, the Hitler Youth Division received secret orders. Assembled without officers present, the young grenadiers listened as senior NCOs outlined expectations. Fight to the death. Never surrender. Treat French civilians ruthlessly. And, most critical, take no prisoners. Some soldiers later claimed the order was to shoot prisoners after interrogation. Others insisted it meant killing on sight. The distinction mattered little. The message was clear. Enemy lives had no value. On June 7th, the Canadians encountered their nightmare, the North Nova Scotia Highlanders, spearheading the 9th Infantry Brigade's advance toward Carpiquet Airfield, moved through the village of Buren toward Abbaye. Supporting them were Sherman tanks of the 27th Canadian Armored Regiment, the Sherbrooke Fusiliers. At Abbaye, Kurt Meyer's panzers struck from concealment. The Canadian tanks, caught in the open, fought desperately. Several were destroyed in the initial volley. The infantry of C Company, surrounded and cut off, fought until their ammunition ran dry. Then they surrendered. What happened next violated every principle of warfare. Eyewitnesses reported Canadians being shot as they raised their hands. Others were bayoneted while attempting to surrender. A German truck deliberately swerved into a column of prisoners, killing 2 instantly while the SS troops laughed and jeered. A tank crushed the bodies of dead Canadians, grinding them into the road. Private Jan Jesionek, a Polish conscript forced into German service, watched in horror. He would later testify that Meyer himself dismissed the idea of taking prisoners, stating they were of no value. Throughout that afternoon, small groups of captured Canadians simply disappeared. 19 prisoners were murdered at Meyer's headquarters at the Abbaye d'Ardenne. The executions were methodical. Prisoners were called by name, led through an archway to the garden, ordered to turn left, then shot in the back of the head. Their bodies were left where they fell. At Chateau d'Audrieux, 26 Canadian and British prisoners faced similar fates. SS Sturmbannführer Gerhard Bremer, commander of the 12th SS Reconnaissance Battalion, personally interrogated 3 Canadians. When they provided no intelligence, he had them executed. Throughout the afternoon, small groups of prisoners were led into the woods. Regularly spaced gunshots echoed back. The guards returned alone. At Putot-en-Bessin, SS Obersturmbannführer Wilhelm Mohnke commanded the 26th Panzer Grenadier Regiment. When his subordinates sent back over 100 prisoners, Mohnke called and ordered them to stop sending so many. The message was understood. Kill them instead. On June 8th, a column of 40 Canadian prisoners was marched toward Mohnke's headquarters. An SS staff car intercepted them. An officer shouted angrily at the escort commander. Then, 45 prisoners were machine-gunned in a field near Fontenay-le-Penel. Bodies were left scattered across the wheat. In total, 156 Canadian soldiers were murdered between June 7th and mid-June 1944, not killed in combat, murdered, shot after surrendering, executed while bound, machine-gunned while wounded. The news reached Canadian commanders within 48 hours. Survivors who escaped told stories that froze the blood. French civilians reported executions they witnessed. British units liberating the Chateau d'Audrieux discovered fresh graves. Canadian military police began documenting evidence immediately. By June 10th, every Canadian unit in Normandy knew what the Hitler Youth had done. The reaction was swift and terrible. Lieutenant Colonel Bruce MacDonald, who would later lead the war crimes investigation, recorded statements from multiple Canadian officers during June 1944. While many testimonies remain classified, the pattern is clear. Verbal orders spread through Canadian units. SS prisoners were not to reach the rear. The historical record here becomes deliberately vague. War crimes by Allied forces were rarely documented with the same rigor as Axis atrocities. But evidence exists in fragments: German combat reports, post-war testimonies, battlefield archaeology. Near Rotz, south of Juno Beach, investigators found bodies of German soldiers shot along a railway line. All were SS. All were shot execution style. Canadian veterans decades later spoke in hushed tones of payback during June 1944. One anonymous sergeant from the Regina Rifles told an interviewer in 1987, "After we heard about the Abbey, the order went out. No Hitler Youth prisoners. We never questioned it. We'd seen what they did to our boys." The change was noted immediately by German forces. SS Obersturmbannführer Karl-Heinz Milius, commander of the 3rd Battalion, 25th SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment, reported to divisional headquarters on June 11th. Enemy forces demonstrating increased unwillingness to accept surrender. Multiple instances of our troops attempting to surrender being fired upon. Recommend extreme caution. The report was ignored. The Hitler Youth leadership dismissed it as Allied propaganda. They learned differently at Le Mesnil-Patry. On June 11th, the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada attacked German positions near the village. The fighting was savage. Canadian infantry, supported by tanks, overran SS positions with methodical brutality. Eyewitness accounts describe Canadians walking through German trenches, shooting every SS soldier they found. Obergefreiter Hans Schmidt, one of few survivors, later testified during war crimes investigations that his entire squad attempted to surrender. "We threw down our weapons and raised our hands. The Canadians kept firing. They shot men who were already wounded. They shot men on their knees, begging. One of our Unteroffiziers spoke English and tried to negotiate. They shot him first." Schmidt survived by hiding beneath corpses until darkness, then crawling to German lines. His testimony was dismissed by Allied investigators as fabrication. but the bodies told their own story. When German forces briefly recaptured the position, they found dozens of SS soldiers shot at close range. The pattern repeated throughout June. At Bretteville-l'Orgueilleuse, Canadian forces overran an SS strongpoint. Post-battle reports noted minimal prisoners taken despite enemy surrender attempts. German after-action reports claimed Canadian forces showed no quarter to Waffen-SS personnel. By mid-June, panic was spreading through the Hitler Youth Division. SS Sturmbannführer Bernhard Siebken, commanding the 2nd Battalion, 26th Panzer Grenadier Regiment, faced a crisis of morale. His young soldiers, raised on propaganda about German invincibility, were discovering that their victims' comrades showed no mercy. On June 9th, 3 wounded Canadian soldiers were captured behind German lines. They were given medical treatment and placed on straw beds at Siebken's headquarters. When Mohnke ordered their execution, Siebken refused. He called divisional headquarters to clarify policy on prisoners. Chief of Staff Hubert Meyer informed him to take as many prisoners as possible for intelligence value. This contradicted everything the division had practiced since June 7th. The confusion revealed a critical truth. There was no unified SS policy. Individual officers were making battlefield decisions to murder prisoners, then claiming they followed orders. Mohnke, furious at Siebken's refusal, found him and held him at gunpoint. 3 SS soldiers lined up across from the wounded Canadians and killed them with automatic weapons fire. Siebken would later be convicted of this crime and hanged in 1949.
But the damage to SS morale was done. The young fanatics of the Hitler Youth Division had expected quick victory. They had been taught that inferior Allied troops would crumble before German superiority. Instead, they faced Canadians who fought with cold fury and showed no mercy. To SS prisoners, SS Rottenführer Friedrich Torbanisch, 18 years old, wrote in a letter captured after his death, "The Canadians fight like demons. They take no prisoners from our division. The older soldiers say we should not have shot theirs. Now we all pay the price. I am afraid." The fear was justified. During Operation Charnwood, the massive assault on Caen beginning July 8th, Canadian units fighting through villages held by the Hitler Youth showed systematic disregard for SS surrender attempts. The Canadian Scottish Regiment's war diary noted, "All ranks stepped into a molten firebath of battle. Few prisoners were taken. The enemy preferred to die rather than give in." The phrasing was deliberate. It suggested German fanaticism rather than Canadian unwillingness to accept surrender. But German survivors told different stories. Unterscharführer Werner Kortenhaus, wounded and captured during Charnwood, survived only because he hid his SS identification and claimed to be Wehrmacht. "I tore off my insignia and threw away my SS paybook. When the Canadians found me, I told them I was 246th Infantry Division. They believed me because I looked young. The man next to me, he still wore his SS runes. They shot him where he lay, never asked questions, just shot him." By late July, the Hitler Youth Division was disintegrating, not from combat losses alone, though those were severe. The psychological impact of facing an enemy who showed them exactly the mercy they had shown was devastating. Kurt Meyer, promoted to divisional command after Fritz Witt's death on June 14th, attempted to address the crisis. In a speech to the remaining officers, he reportedly stated, "The Canadians have learned our methods. They apply them efficiently. We taught them that prisoners are negotiable. Now we negotiate from weakness." The irony was lost on no one. The division that had started the campaign murdering prisoners now faced extinction because their enemies returned the favor. The final reckoning came during the Falaise Pocket in August 1944. As German forces attempted to escape encirclement, the Hitler Youth Division fought desperately to hold escape routes open. Canadian, British, and Polish forces methodically destroyed them. During the chaos, SS prisoners found themselves in a terrifying position. Many Canadian units still refused to accept their surrender. An anonymous Canadian officer, quoted in Terry Kopp's Fields of Fire, stated, "My men knew what the Hitler Youth did in June. When we found SS prisoners, we looked away. What happened, happened." The exact number of SS prisoners killed in retaliation will never be known. Official records are deliberately vague. Canadian battle reports from June through August 1944 show suspiciously low numbers of SS prisoners compared to Wehrmacht captures. The discrepancy suggests systematic patterns. German records are more explicit. Multiple after-action reports from the 12th SS Panzer Division note enemy refusal to accept surrender and execution of prisoners attempting to surrender. These reports were dismissed as propaganda by Allied authorities. But buried in the archives are darker truths. Post-war investigations by Canadian military police found clear evidence of execution sites. Shallow graves containing executed SS soldiers shot execution style. Bodies bearing wounds inconsistent with combat. None of this led to prosecutions. The Allied focus was exclusively on German war crimes. The doctrine was simple. Germany started the war and committed the vast majority of atrocities. Allied violations, while regrettable, were considered justified retaliation. The surviving SS officers who faced trial told different stories than their official testimony. Kurt Meyer, convicted in December 1945 for inciting murder and being responsible for the Abbaye d'Ardenne executions, initially showed no remorse. During interrogation, he defended the murders as necessary military action. But in private conversations with guards, he revealed different thoughts. The trial itself became a window into the consequences of the June massacres. Canadian military prosecutor Lieutenant Colonel Bruce MacDonald assembled a devastating case. Eyewitness testimony from Polish conscript Jan Jasionek provided irrefutable evidence. French civilians testified about witnessed atrocities. Canadian survivors described being marched to execution sites. But the defense raised uncomfortable questions. Meyer's lawyer argued that Canadian forces had also executed prisoners. He demanded investigations into SS deaths under suspicious circumstances. The prosecution successfully argued these were isolated incidents in combat's heat, not systematic murder. The distinction was legally valid but morally troubling. SS Sturmbannführer Alfred Helzel, testifying for the prosecution, initially confirmed that Meyer ordered no prisoners taken. Under pressure in court, he recanted. Then, faced with evidence of his written statement, he confirmed it again. His testimony revealed the confusion within SS ranks about prisoner policy. Some officers claimed orders existed, others denied them. The truth was that men like Meyer created an atmosphere where murder was encouraged even without explicit commands. A Canadian military policeman who guarded Meyer recorded, "He asked me once if I thought the killings in June caused the Canadians to stop taking prisoners. When I said yes, he went silent. Then he said, 'We thought we were teaching them to fear us. Instead, we taught them to hate us. There is a difference.'" Meyer's death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. He served 9 years before release in 1954. He died in 1961, having never publicly acknowledged the chain of consequences his orders created. Wilhelm Mohnke, who personally ordered numerous executions, was captured by Soviet forces in 1945. He spent 10 years in Soviet prisons, then faced British and Canadian investigations. Despite overwhelming evidence, he was never prosecuted. He died in 2001 at age 90, claiming to his death that no orders to murder prisoners were ever given. But the historical record is clear. The Hitler Youth Division murdered 156 Canadian prisoners in June 1944. Canadian forces responded by systematically refusing to accept SS prisoners for the remainder of the campaign. The cycle of atrocity fed upon itself. The human cost was staggering on both sides. Young Canadian soldiers who joined the army to fight tyranny found themselves executing teenagers. SS soldiers, raised on propaganda about German superiority, died begging for mercy in languages their killers didn't understand. Private Charles Martin of the North Shore Regiment, who served throughout the Normandy campaign, spoke in 1994 on the 50th anniversary of D-Day. "We were not murderers when we landed. We were soldiers. But after we found our boys at the Abbey, shot in the head like animals, something broke. We became what we fought against. God forgive us, but we did." This sentiment was echoed by many Canadian veterans in later years. Most refused to discuss what happened to SS prisoners. Those who did speak described moral injury that never healed. They had joined to fight evil, but found themselves committing acts they couldn't reconcile with their self-image as liberators. Lieutenant Donald Learmont, who witnessed a German truck deliberately run down Canadian prisoners on June 7th, testified at Meyer's trial. Decades later, he told an interviewer, "After what they did, we stopped seeing them as human. That's what war does. It strips away civilization. The SS started it, but we finished it. Both sides were guilty. The only difference was who killed more." Canadian psychiatrists who studied Normandy veterans in the 1950s noted unusually high rates of what would now be called PTSD, specifically among units that fought the Hitler Youth. The combination of seeing murdered comrades and participating in revenge killings created deep psychological wounds. Many veterans struggled with guilt, despite their actions being reactions to German atrocities. The transformation was complete. The Canadians who landed on Juno Beach, believing in the rules of war, left Normandy understanding that war has no rules, when the enemy shows no humanity. The SS officers who thought murdering prisoners would terrify their enemies instead created an enemy that showed them no quarter. The lesson was written in blood across the fields of Normandy. Cruelty begets cruelty, and war crimes create more war criminals on all sides. By the time the Falaise Pocket closed on August 21st, 1944, the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, had been annihilated. Of its original 16,000 soldiers, fewer than 300 combat-effective troops remained. The rest were dead, wounded, or captured. The division's casualties exceeded 80%. They had lost over 80% of their tanks, 70% of armored vehicles, 60% of artillery, and 50% of motor vehicles. More devastating than material losses was the destruction of personnel. The average age of the dead was 19 years old. Wehrmacht soldiers who fought alongside the Hitler Youth reported that by August, the surviving SS troops were unrecognizable from June. The fanaticism had burned away, replaced by hollow-eyed exhaustion and terror. They knew the Canadians were hunting them specifically. They knew surrender meant probable death. They fought because fighting was marginally safer than attempting to surrender. German military historian Heinz Meyer, no relation to Kurt Meyer, analyzed the division's destruction in his 1982 study. He concluded that the combination of tactical errors, Allied material superiority and the prisoner situation created perfect conditions for annihilation. The Hitler Youth had made enemies who would accept nothing less than complete destruction. Those who were captured by Canadian forces were the lucky ones. They lived to stand trial, to tell their stories, to face justice. Those who tried to surrender to Canadians in the field during June and July often didn't get that chance. The historical verdict is complex. The SS committed clear war crimes. The evidence is overwhelming, and convictions were justified. But the Allied response, while understandable, created cycles of atrocity that haunted participants for decades. In the end, what German SS officers said when Canadian troops stopped taking prisoners was recorded in their combat reports, their letters home, and their post-war testimonies. They expressed shock, outrage, and finally fear. They claimed the Canadians were violating the rules of war, conveniently forgetting they had murdered 156 prisoners first. The terrible truth was simpler. They had taught the Canadians that in Normandy there were no rules, and the Canadians proved to be excellent students. The mathematics of reciprocity were precise and brutal. 156 murders in June created a cycle of retaliations lasting months. Each German atrocity justified Allied reprisals. Each Allied reprisal confirmed German propaganda about enemy barbarity. The spiral continued until one side was destroyed. History remembers the Hitler Youth massacres. The Canadian response remains largely forgotten, buried in classified files and veteran silence. Both deserve remembrance, if only to understand how quickly civilized soldiers become killers when faced with atrocity.